The following is further clarification of the creation of our universe and ultimately our human race, the angels, by the grace of God. Upon the reflection of where we are in time and space, we are able to see alignments in history such as never before due to modern day revelations, which bring all the more insight into the genius of God, meant to be beheld by us, its very crown jewel of creation. Now, given our knowledge and understanding now, when it comes to quote modern day science, we're able to see how modern day science is actually catching back up with or coming back around full circle to being able to show the extents of science's explanation of the creation of our universe, parallel, in other words, match that of the beginnings of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, void. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now, the first element known to us is hydrogen. The word for hydrogen in Hebrew is mayim, originally at root, meaning waters. Now, as you see here, the word mayim denotes water, fluid, liquid of just about any kind. As we see here, the extents of science's reach is still completely consistent with the depths of the meanings of waters within Genesis. What may have been thought to solely be poetically placed is shown to be true via scientific proof. As it continues to read, "And God said, let there be light, and there was light." And as a hydrogen atom has the appropriate interaction with an electron, this emits light. Furthermore, the 137 constant, the measure of the strength of the electromagnetic force that governs how electrically charged elementary particles and light interact. The number 137 permeates throughout the topic of this process, as light is 137 times faster than an electron. We look at Genesis, we'll see that the 37th word falls upon the 137th letter, that word being light, and describing the designed function of the 137 constant, as it reads, "God divided the light from the darkness." This extends to the creation constantly going on within our very bodies, as the number 37 is renowned to overlay the inner workings of our genetic code, and our cells, our DNA, communicates at the speed of light and via light. as our cells communicate not only with one another, but ultimately with the quantum fields, the universe, the heavens all around us. And to make sure it is clear, hydrogen emitting light answers how there was light before the sun, the moon, and the stars on day, or in other words, in phase 4 of the creation, the formation of our universe, of our world. We are able to observe clearly that the extents of modern day science indeed are consistent with the first verses of Genesis, aligning with these scientific facts, universally acknowledged as being true, is the return of that pure language which was promised. Here let's delve deeper. We will begin with further proof of the records of Genesis. It is held that after the eating of the fruit of knowledge, that the garden was then regulated to thorns and thistles, and that we would eat bread by the sweat of our brow. There are ancient texts that reflect that as this was being held in the circles and cycles from generation to generation, from civilization to civilization, this full circle from Eden to Eden that you and I are experiencing was always both awaited and strived for since Adam and Eve. As again, these truths reflected and preserved from generation to generation through civilization, ancient texts reveal exactly that. As reflected here, O my brilliant mother, the flower withhold not, text literally supporting the record of Genesis of us eating bread by the sweat of our brow. The garden restore I, a direct reference at the garden being rendered to thorns and thistles, and prior to that last passage, here as we see the shiny ones or the bright ones, the brilliant ones, as it is placed in Genesis, were tending the garden, as these translations reflect, as we see here, the shining ones cleared the ground or felled timber. And now, by the grace of God, we are able to see revelations on how this actually materialized in multiple depths, on multiple levels. These gems of truth further solidifies the signature in the stars the very kisses from God itself. This ancient tablet ultimately translates into the star plow. As it was said earlier, that through generation, through generation, through civilization, this truth has been preserved. Just as with Abraham through Sumeria, Joseph through Egypt, and as we are about to see, is the same here in Babylon. Now, the first text from the tablet that we were just reading from, that is in sync and in line with Genesis, was a Sumerian tablet. And just as in Egypt, the way that this was preserved in Babylon were with alignments and logic that ultimately, just as you and I here today, in the moment, simply could not be denied, and because of that timing, because of the happenings, can be regarded to as miracles, such as, of course, ultimately our every breath. But here specifically, such as direct reflections of Joseph in Egypt, in Babylon, Daniel was exalted, and in once again making old things like new, God itself made sure that this information, this link to the stars, this signature from it itself was preserved. As since the tasting of the fruit in the Garden of Eden, this tending the garden and eating bread by the sweat of our brow not only took form literally, as we just saw further proof of earlier, but at this depth, at this level, that reflects a promise kept of the one pure language, a revelation of God itself. And being armed with this knowledge brings all the more grounding to the understanding of the scripture that states that there will be a time where they beat their weapons into, in essence, gardening tools, as we see the direct reflection of what exactly that can mean now, as by the love of God we continue to behold remnants of that pure language, and the origins of that language reflect creation itself in infusing arithmetic, geometry, music, harmony, frequency, sound, and astronomy. The extents of science teaches that the universe began from a single point, perhaps millimeters in size, called the singularity. This completely overlays with teachings from the Kabbalah, which complements the creation held in Genesis for ages now, describing this singular central point of energy. Those four pillars, again highlighting the number 4 itself, as we are bringing together not just the 3 dimensions of space, but by the grace of God, time itself has come full circle. And within this cycle, we are now able to link the astrophysical and the biological as never before. And in regards to light particles being used as mathematical devices to describe the behaviors of quantum fields, when we take that star number 37 and place it in a mirror, its reflection 73 is also a star number. The number 37, in a self-similar fashion, fractally fitting inside of 73 in their star formation. And when we times 37 times 73, those two stars function as a portal, as a stargate, as a doorway that takes us to the first verse of creation itself. In Hebrew, every letter is infused with a numeral and can be read as sentences as well as mathematical expressions. As 37 times 73 equals 2,701, the mathematical equivalent to the first verse in Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And being blessed with being in a place and time where we are able to look back and truly observe what is shown to be a purely productive pattern within the 6 days of creation. As we reflect upon the portrait of what has been a perfectly purposed plan, no matter how seemingly hectic or random things can seem in the moment, where phase 1 is preparation for phase 4, phase 2 was preparation for phase 5, and phase 3 preparation for phase day 6. An orchestration of order which is further displayed within the Book of Formation, also known as the Book of Creation, the Sefer Yetzirah, wherein the calculation of the total permutations of the original 22 characters of our original script, our original human alphabet, equates the modern day computations of stars in the universe. And the fact that we ourselves emit light from ourselves, which ranges at frequencies that mirror those very numbers. This proves all the more the ancient holding that we are a miniature universe. And again, as time itself continues to reveal what is true from what is false, we see now this science proves literally true. An ancient passage held to be shared from my line, that when they ask you where you're from, tell them you are from the light. As now it is known that elements within our bodies originated within the stars themselves. And just as light is held to be in the form of a wave, yet when it is viewed is in the form of a particle, we parallel that reality, being as that we are made up of charged particles and our DNA exhibits a quantum wave form. And just as we are made up of the building blocks that make up all matter, it should bring all the more clarification to the depths of what it means to be made in the image of God. As you are made in its image, its creation, all the things you can see and all the things you cannot see. This world, this universe, its image, and as we are made in its likeness. Once again, when it comes to all the things you can see and all the things which are not visible immediately to you, it that all things came from, and it that is within all things, let alone us, its crown jewel of creation.
What are we waiting for? We're waiting for the revelation of Altus God. Moses revealed to us that God is Alts. God is all. Means there's nothing else except God. It's all naught. But Mashiach, we're waiting for Mashiach to reveal to us that Alts is God. That everything is God.
And once more, the farther the scope of science is able to reach, the more we are able to truly see that in all the ways that it does, God does permeate and in essence shine through and in all things. Orchestration of order in time is continuously revealed everywhere that the scope of modern day science is able to reach. As we see displayed here with a piano, every 7 keys, every 7th note, the frequency increases at a factor of 2, at a power of 2. The same exact sequence which begins the baby's cell. Further fingerprint from the grand orchestrator, God, ultimately, is as the first 7 scales of music and all the notes therein come out to a reflection of the first verse in Genesis of creation itself, wherein here 7 scales with all the notes contained therein come out to the number 28. As in the first verse in Genesis, 7 words with all the letters contained therein coming out to the number 28. And just as we did with the days of creation, and reflect as we are today, when we look back, you will see the geometric sequence within the generations of your very ancestors. And just as we just saw order, design, and purposeful pattern where we may not have been able to surfacely see it or detect it or measure it for a long time as we are now. For example, as we just saw with geometric sequence through frequency. A signature trait of what we are going to show proof is our original language and original script is what is called gematria. And just as in time, even in what may not be surfacely visible, we are able to see the orchestration of organization, of structure, of sequence, and gain further depth of knowledge and understanding when it comes to the composition of communication with our original script. Gematria may also serve to gain further knowledge and understanding when it comes to what may not be surfacely visible, at least immediately. For example, the masterful, elegant artistry displayed in Psalms 23, where we again see a purposeful pattern in composition. We will be seeing other examples of how gematria is embedded with deeper meaning. Within Psalms 23, we see a portrayal of things that can surround one in one's life, be it good or be it bad. Yet in the center of it all, in the eye of what could be a storm, it is with us. As here we see an intentional layout and structure of 26 words on each side of "For thou art with me," in the center of being flanked by 26 words on each side. Now soon we will again go deeper into how the world was of one language, and that language was what we know of today as Hebrew. But first, we'll begin with both modern and ancient evidence that the angels in place and time from Adam and Eve, known as the Greeks, ultimately received their alphabet from the angels known as the Hebrews, and not those angels that were ultimately called the Phoenicians. Once more, on top of modern day research, such as what is referenced here, there are also ancient sources which hold that the origin of the Greek alphabet was directly from the Hebrews. On top of the records of the statements of Eusebius. There are also those from Aristotle, tracing back the timeline of the use of gematria, also called in that time and place isopsephy, where he states the use of gematria is a Pythagorean tradition. And as we trace, match, and align records through history, alignments such as Hermippus, stating that Pythagoras owed all of his theories to the Jews, the Yahudim. And on top of those historic sources, there are also the parallels within the mathematical sciences, as you see some examples of here. Now, just as our original calendar and the pyramid known as the castle serves as proof of the world at one time being of one language, just as it was held in Genesis, we are going to see how mathematical expressions within gematria serve to prove the same, and that original language was indeed the Hebrew, and the script thereof, as you see evidence of here, being what was once called hieratic, meaning priestly, as it was passed to and then passed from Enoch, and that name, Hebrew, stemming from one of the descendants of Adam and Eve, and ultimately of Noah and Emzara, great-grandson of Shem, Noah's son, and the father of Peleg, as it is held that in his time the world was divided from that one language. The original Hebrew, the original 22 characters and numbers infused, and then ultimately the separation of those numbers and characters came in time, as ultimately records reflect. And as we will see more of in this sharing, what originated our scripts, our writing, our language, and built pyramids are far older than what you know of as Egypt, as displayed in the infusion of letters and numbers which can represent mathematical expressions, such as in the first verse of creation, and also embedded within the pyramids themselves. Both Egypt and Babylon did not have pi down to such an accuracy. Egypt, for some time now, accredited by some with the creation of the pyramids, and both Egypt and specifically Sumer have long been accredited with the earliest records of writing. Now, as we'll see later in this sharing, the extents of science today holds that writing began virtually at the same time in both Egypt and Sumer, which again is consistent with Genesis, holding that all the world was of one language. We will also see the quote, hieratic, is not held to be younger than hieroglyphics, and again hieratic, meaning priestly, is actually the original Hebrew script. The form of the characters used in this display are that of which took place after an exile, but the representation, of course, remains the same. After seeing simply how pi is embedded into the structure of the Great Pyramid, we're also going to see how it is bound to the first verse of Genesis and how pi is interwoven, encoded in that very first verse of creation. Now, the smallest whole number approximation of pi is 22 divided by 7. But we are going to once again turn up the power of the microscope, focus in on the resolution, and zoom in deeper than the relation between the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, forming the 7 words of creation that represent the 7 days, 7 phases, 7 occurrences that resulted in forming creation, the universe, the world as we know it. Now what we're going to do is in the exact same fashion in which we began. We're going to calculate the numeric values of letters used within the first verse. And specifically, we're going to add together the beginning letter to each of the 7 words in the first verse of Genesis. Now starting with the first letter of the first word, Bet, which equals 2. First letter of the second word, also Beit, which equals 2. First letter of the third word, Aleph, which equals 1. Then of the fourth word, again Aleph, equaling 1. Then of the fifth word, Hey, which equals 5. Then the first letter of the sixth word, Vav, equals 6. And then the first letter of the seventh word, again Hey, which equals 5. So the total sum of the initial letters of each of the 7 words is 22. 22, the sum of the initial letters of the first 7 words. And also, in other words, 22 divided by 7 is the average value of the initial letters. 22 divided by 7, the smallest whole number approximation for pi. For those who would be thinking that these types of alignments are coincidence, not only are we about to see further examples of how pi is etched and interwoven within the first verse of Genesis, but after more examples here, you will also see it is sourced that it has been computed that the chances of this happening are 0.005 or 1 in 19,000. Now to even further complete the connection between pi and the first verse in Genesis, we are first going to add up the numeric value for every letter in the word Torah, which in Hebrew is the Bible, can also mean teaching, guidance, direction, or law. Here we're adding together the numeric values of Tav, 400, Vav, 6, Resh, 200, and Hey, 5. So the complete gematria for the word Torah is 611. So now we're about to see how the numeric value for the Torah, 611, which is in essence a way of saying, expressing Torah in the language of pure mathematics. So now, how that 611 and the total numeric value of the first verse in Genesis, that 2,701, are tied into pi. It has been computed that in the mathematical constant known as pi, 3.14, the number 3 standing for so many things, such as a start, a process, and a completion, wherein here we are speaking of the first verse of Genesis, the verse of creation. And after the decimal point in pi, if we add together the 611 digits after the decimal point, it has been calculated that that amount comes out to 2,701, directly reflective of the total numeric value of the first verse in Genesis. And when it comes to the odds of this coming by chance, computations have reflected a 0.09%. And in further reinforcing the connection of pi in the first verse in Genesis, when we take the number of the letters times the product of the letters, which is the sum of numerals times together, and divide that by the number of the words times the product of the words, we also come out to pi, to at least 4 places after the decimal point. Here we have the sum of timesing 28, as in the 28 letters, by each of their numeric values. And counting that out to 4 decimal places comes out to 6.6886. And now timesing the 7 words times each of their total numeric values comes out to 2.1290. And as we divide those sums, as you're seeing here, it takes the shape of pi out to 4 decimal places. And in further demonstrating that this is no coincidence, also when using small gematria, gematria Ketana, we see a self-similar symmetry with relation to pi. Here we see the mathematical equivalent to the first verse of Genesis using small gematria, which comes out to the number 82. And the small gematria of the word Torah, which we saw earlier, was 611, using gematria proper. Using small gematria, it is the number 17. And just as we saw the connection between 2,701, which is the mathematical equivalent to the first verse of Genesis, and the number 611, which is the mathematical equivalent of the word Torah, the small gematria of that word being 17, when we add together the 17 numerals following the decimal point of pi, it comes out to the number 82, the small gematria of the first verse in Genesis. A mirrored symmetry in self-similar fashion. So once more, the mathematical equivalent to the first verse in Genesis is 2,701, and the mathematical expression of the word Torah is 611, and 611 digits after the decimal point of pi equates to 2,701. And self-similarly, the small gematria of the first verse of Genesis is 82. The small gematria of the word Torah is 17. And 17 places after the decimal point of pi equates to the number 82. A self-similar reflection to 611 digits after the decimal point, equating to the full gematria of 2,701, the first verse in Genesis. And furthermore, if we begin from the 17th numeral after the decimal point of pi and add together the 611 digits after that 17th numeral, it again equates to 2,701, again highlighting the mathematical expression of the first verse of Genesis. This perfect symmetry reflects both forwards and backwards, with the first 611 numerals after the decimal point equating to 2,701, and the 17 numerals that follow it equating to 82. And in mirrored symmetry, the first 17 numerals after the decimal point equate to 82, and the 611 numerals which follow it equal 2,701. Again, the mathematical expression of the first verse in Genesis. Now, going even deeper, earlier we saw the parallel between the extents of science stating that the universe began from what is called the singularity, which is completely consistent with what has been preserved through Kabbalah as the creation beginning from a central point. In Hebrew, the word point, nekuda, has a gematria of 165. Now we're about to see a very strong, very sweet signature, as 165 is also the gematria of the first two and last two letters of the Tetragrammaton, otherwise known as the four-letter name of God. And 165 is the central point of 329, which is the ordinal gematria of the first verse in Genesis. So once more, the extents of science today holds that the universe began from a singularity, which is a central point. The gematria for the word point is 165, which is the central point of 329, the ordinal gematria of the first verse in Genesis. Likewise, mathematically expressed via gematria at the central point of the ordinal gematria of in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth is the signature of the four-letter name of God. Moreover, in further tying the mathematical constant known as pi to the first verse of Genesis, when we compute the digits of pi, we see that the 165th numeral, and again 165 being the gematria for point, the 165th numeral, that point marks the beginning of the first time 2701, the gematria of the first verse of Genesis, appears for the first time. Here we see a computation of that fact calculated, as each of you can look up for yourselves. And getting all the more specific with regards to detail, the gematria for the word central, as ultimately the singularity is a central point. That gematria for the word central is 611, just as it is for the word Torah. Adding the gematria for central and point together, central point comes out to 776. Now, starting at the 776 numeral of the digits of pi after the decimal point, the gematria for central point, the 165 digits which appear here in yellow equate to 776, the gematria for central point. And then the remaining 611 digits which appear here in white equate to the mathematical equivalent to the first verse of Genesis, 2701. As we see a mathematical overlay of the first verse of Genesis and the additional detail preserved through the Kabbalah embedded within the mathematical constant known as pi. Though this should be very obvious that there is nothing random going on here, at least at this point. The odds of this phenomena being random or by chance have been computized, and those calculations reflect that even individually the chances are at least 0 point percentages. And this is individually, let alone taking them all into account. And further connection between the first verse of Genesis and pi is the fact that the first verse in Genesis is made up of 7 words that come out to 28 letters, and the first 7 digits of pi after the decimal point, those first 7 numerals equate to 28. 7 words in Genesis 1:1, 28 letters, 7 digits after the decimal point of pi equate to 28. Take a moment to situate the fact that we just clearly saw how a mathematical constant is directly related, intertwined, and embedded with both an ancient physical structure and an ancient language, which again, all 3 drawing connections to one another. Now, as we continue to see further proof of the original source which language and the sciences that we know of today stemmed from, here we are going to see how the Sanskrit text, which is known to come later than the hieratic text, or more clearly put, the original Hebrew form of text, as the only other place where you find pi in antiquity is in the Rig Veda, established as fact came after the hieratic. And again, closer put, in actuality, the original Hebrew. And in further proving that the languages and the mathematics, the sciences altogether, which we have today, all stem from an original source, regardless of what extents some of our technology has blossomed into. Here you see that studies have expressed the relations between hieratic and ultimately Sanskrit. In another sharing, we will get deeper into the connections of the number 32, but in brief, at the moment, it stands out that that display of pi in the Rig Veda is up to 32 digits, and that there are 32 numbers that can calculate every single mathematical constant which are needed to have, let alone the very functions of our universe. Overlay with the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation, holding that there are 32 wonderful pathways to which God created the universe. And here, before we move on to further proof of Genesis chapter 11, verse 1, that all the world was of one language, here we see how the formation of the numbering system was preserved throughout the years by the Hebrews. Here you will see proof that the hieratic is actually the original Hebrew characters. When you look it up, you will find that there have been hundreds of archaeological findings of this Hebrew hieratic being used throughout the Davidic kingdom's time period. You will also find that writings by the Zadokite line, which is the line since Aaron, brother of Moses, were also done in this original Hebrew, as well as other scrolls found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, as it has been so far in Israel. Not only what has been called the oldest written, quote, religious inscriptions found in these original Hebrew characters, but as you are about to see here, it has been confirmed by experts in this very field that these inscriptions are indeed Hebrew, as you are seeing here. Now, archaeological findings are now proving that, quote, hieratic, that original Hebrew script, did not come after hieroglyphics. And furthermore, as you see here, archaeological findings are proving that ultimately that original Hebrew is also not younger or after the writings in Sumer. And as you see here, unlike what was held as usual secular consensus, it is indeed this Hebrew that later the Canaanite and Phoenicians also used without gematria. Now we'll again take a look at further gematria and mathematical alignments, such as the numerical equivalent to the first verse in Genesis 2701, the 73rd triangular number, the formation of a pyramid, continue to reveal the genius in our Genesis. As Genesis 1:1 and those 7 words consisting of 28 letters, which is the 7th triangular number that foreshadow the outline of the 7 days of creation, mathematically form the last of the original 7 wonders of the world, and is held to be made by the 7th patriarch since Adam, Enoch. Even further miraculous alignments via letters infused with numbers serving as mathematical devices completely aligns the book of Isaiah chapter 19 verses 19 and 20 with the Great Pyramid itself, as every letter equates out to 5,449, which is ultimately the height in pyramid inches up to the capstone summit of the Great Pyramid. This trait of perfect precision is a unique signature as to the gematria being original to the Hebrews, and what was ultimately an imitation of gematria by the Babylonians called Aru is renowned to have not been able to be the origin of Gematria, as it assigned values to whole words arbitrarily. In other words, the values were just made up for whatever reasons and alignments there were in the moment. Moreover, this degree of intimate knowledge of the pyramid is further proof of it indeed being architected by Enoch. And as displayed here, the accuracy of that scripture being as the pyramid is literally in the midst of Egypt. As also Giza can mean border. And as time, by the grace of God, continues to reveal all things, all the more we have the return of that pure language which was promised. And as history continues to become all the more clear, we see how the truth aligns like the stars themselves. As we have accounts of history, such as Abraham teaching astrology amongst other sciences to the Egyptians, and of course accrediting that knowledge to Enoch. There are a number of historic accounts which reflect the same. As ultimately, this information was passed down since Adam and Eve. And as also is consistent with the world at one time being of one language, it is known that through different times and places, Enoch was known by different names such as Thoth, Hermes, Zarathustra, Idris, and Saurid, Enki, as well as Atlas. And though the names may have varied, the preservation of the sciences of writing and also the calendar, the details of which we saw earlier in this sharing, all of this is consistent with the historical record of Enoch. And as Enoch is accredited with passing down the sciences such as mathematics and astrology, as he is also accredited with passing down the architecture of the pyramid, we see that those disciplines are reflected from the pyramids themselves, such as with the alignment of the stars and the fact that there are over 80 mathematical and physical constants embedded within the Great Pyramid. And this is just when it comes to the mathematical constants that have been rediscovered as up to date. And as we know that mathematical constants are the infrastructure of the entire universe, it brings all the more credence to the quote, "As above, so below, as within, so without, as the universe, so the soul." This has been expressed with the pyramids themselves, being as that the pyramids are capable of physio-electricity, such as our very bodies. This I know, as by the grace of God, I have been blessed with reaching these levels.
In 2002, scientists made the exciting discovery that calcite microcrystals exist on the pineal gland, and that these crystals can interact with electromagnetic fields.
These crystals have piezoelectric properties with excitability in the frequency range of mobile telecommunications. They theorize that the interactions of these crystals with Global System for Mobile Telecommunication Waves could constitute a new mechanism of transduction of the pineal membrane. What this means in layman's terms is that our pineal gland is a cell phone. The wireless transmitter that links us with universal consciousness is our pineal gland. In 2002, Israeli researchers made an astounding discovery. They discovered that there's two types of crystals on and in the pineal gland, and that these crystals actually are tuners or resonators that, if stimulated by sound, these crystals have the piezoelectric effect. They release a positive charge, and this is quite amazing.
We will delve deeper into this subject in a future sharing. And as time, by the grace of God, continues to reveal depths of subject matters that we may have thought we already had a grasp on, be it an ancient pyramid, an ancient scripture, or our very own bodies. And in future sharings, we'll further go over how to power the elements within you to reach these levels, though we will touch on one thing that aligns with the scope of this video here soon. The fourth phase of intracellular water takes the shape of a hexagonal structure. Studies within different levels of frequency within electromagnetic fields have also shown that our DNA within those conditions compacts into a hexagon. And once again, there are substantial studies on how the number 37 correlates with our genetic code, both in structure and functions. And the mathematical equivalent for the first verse of Genesis, which foreshadows the account of creation, 2701, forms the 37th perfect hexagon. And as we also know that 2701 is also the 73rd triangular number, we observe here that 6 of those triangles form a hexagon, as in parallel to the 6 days of creation. And just as the mathematical equivalent to the first verse of Genesis, which foreshadows that 2701, the full sequence of the 7 days, the 7 phases of creation, is the 37th hexagonal number. The number 37 is the ordinal gematria for the word wisdom. And just as 37 also overlays functions and structures of our genetic code, the number 37 added on to the mathematical equivalent of the first verse of Genesis, 2701, equates to the total molecular weight of all 20 amino acids needed to power our cells, to power our bodies. These numbers continue to highlight one another as 2,738 is 37 times 74, 74 being the 37th even number. And in fractal fashion, in self-similar fashion, one of the depths of being made in the image of God, the two figured numbers, the two star numbers, which are the only two factors of the first verse of Genesis. In other words, the only two numbers when times together equal the mathematical equivalent to the first verse of Genesis, 2,701. Those two star numbers which serve as a portal to the first verse of Genesis, the first verse of creation, fit self-similarly one within the other. And all the more highlighting this alignment, 37, on top of being the ordinal gematria of wisdom, is the exact center point of the number 73, the gematria of wisdom. 37 and 73 also mirror one another in regards to their prime number placement, 37 being the 12th prime number and 73 being the 21st. And adding to this unique exclusivity, 12 and 21 also mirroring one another with regard to the prime number placement. 12 squared and 21 squared are also reflective of one another at 144 and 441. 73 is also the 37th odd number. And in further numerical highlight, the reflective number, the mirror of 2,701, is 1072, or 1072, and when added to 2,701 comes out to 3,773, or 3773. And as we look at the 73rd triangular number made by 2,701, the mathematical equivalent to the first verse of Genesis, inside that 73rd triangular number fits the 37th triangular number, 703. And as earlier in this sharing, we saw how creation as captured in Genesis is consistent with the extents of science. As we zoom in the magnification of our modern day microscope into the depths of the beginnings of Genesis, and in the light of thought, as we see our origins thought by some to just have been anciently poetically placed, now proven. As we look deeper into just how significant the sophistication of the information infused, encoded into the first verse of Genesis. The first verse of Genesis: in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, embedded with not only the expressions of mathematical constants, but also in its formation, in its orchestration, as apparent in its most surface sequence of the symphony of sevens within the first verse of Genesis. 4 sevens representing the 4 dimensions of space and time. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And again, those 2 figurate numbers, those 2 star numbers, serve as a stargate to the first verse of Genesis, which in itself, among all of the mathematical expressions which we have gone over in other sharings, also has fractal properties to it itself. It is renowned that the mathematical equivalent to the first verse in Genesis, 2701, forms the 73rd triangular number. And as you see here, in a beautiful orchestra of symmetry, mirrored reflection, and fractal formatting, the numbers 37 and 73 again are etched, are inlaid within the mathematical expression of the first verse of Genesis, 2701, as again that number forms the 73rd triangular number, and its mirror, the 37th triangular number, fits fractally within it. Furthermore, studies of DNA sequences using the frequency chaos game, also in a fractaled triangle. And even deeper still, electrons being one of the fundamental building blocks of matter in the universe, and also playing a key role within our very bodies, can be actually observed in a fractal format, again within a fractaled triangle.
A new study has shown that researchers have been able to make and see a fractal out of electrons, specifically a Sierpinski triangle. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to the dimensionality of fractals. Electrons behave differently based on what configuration they're in because of the way their charges pull on each other. They're in one dimension, configured linearly, or in two dimensions, making up a sheet, or in three dimensions in something like a cube. Their interactions with one another and their resulting behavior differs based on these configurations. This team used a scanning tunneling microscope to place carbon monoxide molecules very carefully on a background of copper. The copper allows the electrons in these particles to behave very freely, so the measurements they took of the resulting shape, both spatial and in electronic wave function, showed that when in this shape, the electrons behaved as if they were in 1.58 dimensions, the fractional dimension expected of a Sierpinski triangle. Teeny Sierpinski triangle fractals, just 20 nanometers big.
Now, soon, we will be delving deeper into the alignments which prove that the interworkings and functions of our DNA and body is indeed by design. Pyramids around the world correspond to one another, such as like the alignments with the stars. Also, the bodies of water found beneath the pyramids. These streams, these lakes of water, of liquid, are just as much purposeful as they are beautiful. This characteristic in design is found throughout the world, as we are seeing here. For years, it has been said by many that the inside of the pyramids appear to be the inner workings of a masterful work, the mechanics of a power plant. And we are witnessing proof of exactly that. With the walls of these great pyramids being made up of quartz crystal, when a flow of water passes through these underground tunnels and shafts and cavities, it's capable of producing an electrical current known as physioelectricity. As here we can enjoy seeing this crystal clear water, which is as purposeful, as productive as it is beautiful. Same fashion, what is renowned as the Pyramid of the Sun contains lakes of liquid mercury, and the walls themselves, which are laced and carefully impregnated with the crystal known as pyrite, which functions as a conductor of electricity. And once more, in infusing beauty with practical purpose, this perfection is renowned within the candlelight, the torchlight, firelight, to give the appearance, the setting of standing under the stars themselves. And as this arc of time continues to reveal all, we see that the construction of the pyramids around the world not only reflect as proof of Genesis 11 verse 1 that all the world was of one language, as we will get deeper into here in a moment, but they also serve as physical representations of as above, so below, as within, so without, and a depth of on earth as it is in heaven, being as that, just as mathematical constants serve as an infrastructure to the universe, it has been confirmed that there are over 80 mathematical constants and physical constants embedded within the Great Pyramid. And ultimately, the angel whom has been held to have architected the pyramids, learning from those who originated the first 7 words of Genesis, which come out to 28 letters, the 7th triangular number, and ultimately that mathematical equivalent, the gematria of the first verse of Genesis, equaling the 73rd triangular number. Again, those 28 letters, that 7th triangular number, which takes the shape of the last standing of the original 7 wonders of the world, is held to have been architected by the 7th patriarch since Adam, Enoch. And in a reflection of as within, so without, just as it has been discovered that the presence of the microcrystals within our brain, within our pineal gland, serve toward the process of physioelectricity within us. As you're about to see here, the construction and layout of the pyramids around the world not only serve as landmarks of Genesis chapter 11 verse 1, that all the world was of one language, but also once more directly reflect as within, so without, as that very layout, that architecture is designed for physioelectricity. And a part of the strong and sweet signature of as within, so without, is what is still at this point the new scientific discovery of the 4th phase of intracellular water, which is a crystalline substance. And as it reflects the crystalline structure described of the firmament in the book of Ezekiel, this is a direct realization of the kingdom of heaven being within you,
New interpretations of the text now suggest the entire Torah was encoded into a crystalline substance, not necessarily a crystal, but a crystalline substance that fit into the palm of a single hand. And when the Ark of the Covenant is revealed and made public, we will see that is the case.
The fourth phase of water, intracellular water, structured water.
Entire Torah was encoded into a crystalline substance.
A liquid crystal type of water in the cell that facilitates energy and information transfer.
Structure of each one of these planes, you can see that it's a honeycomb, hexagonal kind of structure. Understanding the fourth phase, I think, is the key to unlock the door to understanding of many phenomena.
And an even deeper parallel to the kingdom of heaven being within you is the fact that that fourth stage of intracellular water structure, just as the angel just mentioned, is a hexagonal structure. Genesis 1:1, the first verse of Genesis, is 7 words made up of 28 letters, 4 sevens. The number 28 is the fourth hexagonal number, directly reflecting that fourth stage of intracellular water structure, a hexagonal crystalline structure. And even further paralleling the records of creation, the first verse of Genesis is the fact that there are 28 letters, which aligns with the fact that arithmetical analysis of our genetic code reflect a 28-gon polyhedral view of our genetic code. This connects with analysis of our genetic code, which is based on the number 37, which again only deeper parallels the first verse of Genesis, as the full gematria of that first verse, 2701, is the 37th hexagonal number. And as you just saw, the first verse of Genesis is made up of 28 letters. 28 is the fourth hexagonal number, and the fourth stage of intracellular water is a hexagonal structure. And the full gematria of the first verse of Genesis, 2701, is the 37th perfect hexagon. The number 37 directly correlating with studies of our genetic code, synchronized in sync with the number 37. As here we see proof of the extents of science coming full circle with our ancient historical records, and specifically here, the kingdom of heaven being within you. And as by the grace of God, time continues to reveal all things, here we see scientific proof of what was depicted in the book of Ezekiel as a crystalline substance. As you see the reports of such studies here. And as we continue to see the different formats in which it is shown that we indeed have a crystalline universe, crystalline heavens. As we see here, the center, the core of stars turns into a crystalline substance. And just as above, so below, we are able to see that the very core of our earth also contains a crystalline substance. Now soon we will see all the more in depth, but here we're able to gain better understanding already as to what it means that God encoded the entire Torah into a crystalline substance, as we are now able to literally verify the existence of a crystalline substance in quote outer space, the heavens, within our very earth and within our very cellular structure. Further proof of the signatures of God is that just like the fourth stage of our intracellular water structure is a hexagonal structure, to the extent that we are able to look out into the heavens, the quantum fields which make up this universe, the cosmos, also reflects that same hexagonal structure. And just as above, so below, the extents of the measurements of mankind, our sciences, and our technology reflect that same crystalline hexagonal structure within our very Earth's core. Again, it is the glory of God to entrench or hide a thing. It is the honor of queens and kings to seek them out. And just as virtual particles are mathematical devices used to describe quantum fields, these mathematical devices, known as star numbers, which particularly serve as a portal, as a stargate to the first verse of Genesis, where it is written that God created the heavens and the earth, these quantum fields, this universe, and the signatures of that fact are now revealed as never before, as the very star numbers, the portals to the first verse of Genesis, contain the very hexagonal structure, the hexagonal shape found within the crystalline lattice within the earth as it is in the heavens, and a part of the proofs of us being the very crown jewel of creation within the fourth phase of intracellular water structure, and in representation of the four dimensions of time and space created by God. Genesis verse 1, at its most surface infrastructure, is composed of 4 sevens, which equal 28, the fourth hexagonal number. And even deeper still, the full gematria of the first verse of Genesis, 2701, is the 37th hexagonal number, otherwise known as a perfect hexagon. And miraculously, we see one of these key signatures that has been engraved, etched throughout creation, also embedded in what has been preserved through time by the children of Israel, known as the Star of David, as the Seal of Solomon. And as we can see here, within the star, the 6 triangles of the same sort represented by the full gematria of the first verse of Genesis. The 6 triangles make up the hexagon in the middle, as you're seeing here, and blossom out into a representation of the 6 days of creation, with the 7th a rest. And as further proof of the signatures of God itself within creation, we are able to see, like never before, the purpose within the pattern which laid out the 6 days of creation, showing order where it may have been thought was solely chaotic. A beautiful portrayal of that fact is in what is known as the 6th planet of Saturn, which, amongst what is depicted as a storm, a hexagonal shape remains persistent, an example of order even amongst things that can be perceived as random or chaotic. Genesis 1:1 is 4 sevens, as a symphony is 4 parts, and as the first movements of the Royal Symphony that was and is creation continues to be revealed to us, we are able to see the realization of God encoding the entire Torah in a crystalline substance. But just as we now have proof of that crystalline substance found throughout our very universe, the heavens and the earth, further proof as to in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth is the fact that just as science proves the crystalline substance which is outlined via new interpretations of the book of Exodus, that God encoded the entire Torah in a crystalline substance, revelations in science such as the proof of that very crystalline substance now overlay with our ancient historical records, such as the Kabbalistic holding that everything began with God concentrating its energy into a central point, which parallels the consensus of the extents of modern day science that the universe began with a singularity prior to what is renowned as the Big Bang. This parallel runs even deeper with the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation, which holds that God created the universe using 22 letters and the numbers 1 through 10. And now we are able to see an overlay between the consensus of modern day science as to the beginnings of our universe and the orchestrated order of the 22 letters portrayed and outlined in the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation, also known as the book of creation, where it is held that of the 22 letters passed down since Adam and Eve, after Eber, known as the Hebrew alphabet, there are 3 mother letters which began creation. This parallels the first 3 elements after what is renowned scientifically as the Big Bang, known to have begun with what is scientifically held as the singularity, central point held Kabbalistically and further proven within the depths of the first verse of Genesis. So thus far we have a direct parallel between the first 3 mother letters of Aleph, Mem, and Shin, and also the first 3 elements, hydrogen, helium, and lithium. Next, it reads in the Sefer Yetzirah 7 doubles. And when we take a look at what science holds as the first 7 elements created in stars after hydrogen, helium, and lithium, we see a particular pattern continue where the number of protons and electrons skip 2 single units, in essence, a double. It is further held in the Sefer Yetzirah that the next 12 letters which complete the 22 letters are, quote, simples. Scientifically, those next 12 elements are considered simple elements. And perhaps further revelation will reveal which exact letters correspond with which exact elements. As for example, iron is also a simple element which develops within the stars. And though almost every element up to iron can be considered simple, they are not all simple, and the parallel of 3 mother letters and the first 3 elements, along with the skipping of 2 units, in essence doubles within the electrons and protons of the next 7 elements after the first 3, are all the more highlighted paralleling God creating the universe using 22 letters and the numbers 1 through 10 as a scientific theory of dark matter approximates that for every particle that can be seen are 10 that cannot be seen of equal mass. And as there are scientists which propose that virtual particles are the explanation for dark matter, the description of the 10 Sephirot are strikingly similar, such as the 10 Sephirot have the appearance of a lightning flash. And as we see here, virtual particles can sometimes appear as flashes of light. The Sefer Yetzirah reads that their origin is unseen and that no end is perceived. This is right in line with virtual particles seemingly coming out of nowhere or nothing and may have no end because they are a part of the fields that make up everything. And by the grace of God, we are now able to see all the more clearly realizations of the depths of God encoding the entire Torah in a crystalline substance using the 22 letters and the numbers 1 through 10 to create the universe. We see this through depths of creation as the 22 Hebrew letters also parallels the fact that there are 22 chromosomes outside of the male or female chromosome within the human body, as well as within another depth of our very genetic code, as there are 22 Hebrew letters and ultimately 20 amino acids plus a start group and a stop group. This is for nearly all of creation considered a living organism. There are scientists dedicated to such disciplines that have found that their work has led them to title publishings as biology's optimal molecular alphabet may be preordained, as research from different scientists only reflects that our being here is not by chance, as there are more ways to put together a string of amino acids than there is sand on Earth. And in further proving correct statements such as life may not be just a set of accidental events, rather there may be universal laws governing the evolution of life, is the fact that though it reflects that there are more ways to put together a string of amino acids than there are stars in the universe, just as it is held that God created the universe using 22 letters, the total permutations of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet is amongst the ranges of stars in the universe. Furthermore, there have been amino acids found on meteorites, albeit after they've been found here on Earth. Regardless, ultimately, only all the more proving ancient holdings such as when they ask you where you're from, tell them you are from the light. As once more, there are elements within us shown to originate within the stars themselves before being expanded throughout the universe. And now in time, further depths of as within, so without being revealed, just as it is computed that the total permutations of the number 22 equates to the modern day calculations of stars in the universe, as well as there being 22 Hebrew letters, there are ultimately 22 amino acids, counting a start and a stop group in 22 pairs of chromosomes within our bodies. And in parallel to Hebrew having a triple root structure, DNA messages are written in 3-letter triplets. And in even deeper correlation, DNA being structured from a basis of 4 and coding in triplets is in parallel to the formation of the 12 tribes of Yisrael in the desert.
The whole book of Bamidbar, the fourth of the books of the Pentateuch, which is called the Book of Numbers in English, is because the beginning of it records the campsites of the Jewish people. There is the way that the campsites, called the Galim, the flags of the tribes, were ordered, and they're reordered. It's a reordering process. They're reordered into 4 triplets. And the whole idea of a camp is that it's all together. It's an army, and the camp is an army. And the army is all operating and functioning together. And the way that it's ordered is in triplets. Each triplet also in time corresponds to the yearly cycle of the 4 seasons. The 4 seasons of the year, that each season has 3 months to it.
And as we continue to observe these signatures of God from the very heavens to our very cellular structure, it is scientifically observed that our genetic code writes or codes in triplets or in 3s from a basis of 4, giving a possibility for 64 potential codons, which is what you call those triplets, those 3s, called nucleotides. So to clarify, 3 nucleotides from a basis of 4 makes a codon, and there are 64 possible codons. That mathematical layout parallels one of the Hebrew names for God, having 3 letters in 4 places. A signature mathematically realizing being made in the image of God, reflected from within our genetic code.
Permutations of 64 have long been known and used in the context of the 4 letters of the Hebrew name of God, which consists of 3 letters in 4 places, thus giving 64 combinations.
And as these signatures of God, the Most High, are revealed at depths that have never been before, just as we are able to see a parallel between the four-letter name of God and our genetic code. This is amplified all the more with the fact that half of 6432, which is the number held as being used by God to create the universe, 32 wonderful or mystical paths, reflecting as a signature in our very cell, as there are 32 transfer RNAs within our genetic code which serve as physical links to translate, to transcribe the 64 codons of our genetic code. And as we continue to see order and sequence through the symphony that is creation, we are able to see that the number 7, in so many ways standing for a cycle in time, such as in the 7 days of creation, that number 7 is the total number of factors for the number 64. And in beholding the sequence within the symphony that has been creation, we are able to see that every 7 keys on the piano increases at a power of 2. The same exact sequence in the growth of a baby's cell. Further revelation of the glory of God, the signature of God throughout creation, within the note that contains the 7th frequency, 64, are the only 2 numbers that you can times together to get 2,701, the full gematria of the first verse of Genesis. And in further beholding the orchestration of this order, we see here that there are 7 scales with all the notes contained therein come out to 28. This overlays the first verse of Genesis, which is 7 words with all the letters contained therein, equaling 28. And though soon we will be briefly touching on the maps, the calendars, the calculators, the clocks, both preserved and passed down through antiquity, such as the 72 names of God, the table of the Sefer Yetzirah, and the Yi Ying. Here we see it displayed that the 64 famous to the Yi Ying can be structured paralleling 7 scales with 28 notes, just as the musical scales themselves are 7 scales with all of the notes contained therein coming out to the number 28, which overlays the first verse of Genesis, 7 words which are made up of 28 letters. and further signature within the symphony of creation, within the seven scales, as the note which contains the seventh frequency also has encoded within it the numbers 73 and 37, the only two numbers that you can times together that equate to the full gematria of the first verse of Genesis, 2701. As order and sequence is revealed to us in a way like never before, both in electromagnetic frequencies and in the growth of an embryo. Though it is amazing, it at this point should not be surprising that that mark of both mastery and majesty reflects itself through something so intrinsically intertwined with representing intellect, the game of chess. Sharing all the more that though you may not always understand its moves, its decisions, or its purpose, God is indeed perfect. As we saw the geometric sequence progressing at a power, at a factor of 2, infused and intertwined throughout electromagnetic frequency, through the growth of a baby's cell and embryo, we see those numbers through the structure of the strategically based intellectual function that is chess. As ultimately, the game has 64 spaces, 32 contrasting from the other, 16 pieces each. The total spaces also equal the perfect square of 8, the perfect cube of 4, and the sixth power of 2. Perhaps there are those who've been familiar with the game of chess who now see deeper beyond the surface than they have before, even when it comes to chess, let alone when we are speaking of the creation of the universe, of our world. And in beholding this genius, it makes all the more sense why the I Ching, that is based on the number 64 and so often associated with the total 64 spaces in chess, but also to the 64 codons of our very genetic code. And just as there have been many parallels between the 64 codons of our genetic code and the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, in essence, the properties of fractal math parallel the Yi-Yin as it does our very DNA. With fractal properties in its structure, its sequences, and electromagnetic resonance. a demonstration of fractal math.
You take a line and you divide it in half. Take each product of that division and apply that same previous step, and on and on and on into infinity, a recursive pattern.
We also see a fractal format in the only two numbers which times together are a gateway to the first verse of Genesis, 37 and 73. And even deeper still, we are able to see the fractal format of the first verse of Genesis itself, such as here in the sequence of the geometric figures made up of the gematria of the first verse of Genesis, getting as intricate as forming the 73rd triangular number and the mirroring of those numbers 37 and 73 within that central figure as depicted here. And as we amplify the power, the zoom of our microscope on the first verse of Genesis, we see that it is composed of a symphony of sevens. As here we have all the more perspective of the infinitely top tier technology that transcends time, which God has instilled in our universe and in us. As we see concepts which are the infrastructure of technology today has been based off of the utmost ancient. With the I Ching actually shown to predate Chinese history, further evidence that this is technology preserved through the flood lies in the beginnings of the Chinese characters. The ancient Chinese character for boat is made up of the characters for vessel, eight, and mouth, held to also represent people. The origins of these characters completely align with the records of Genesis, as in Noah's Ark there were 8 people: Noah, his wife, 3 sons, and their 3 wives. The character for garden is made up of the characters for dust, breath, 2 persons, and an enclosure, to mean garden. This parallels God making Adam and Eve in the garden, forming mankind from the dust of the earth. The Chinese character for naked consists of the characters for man and fruit, drawing a parallel to mankind eating the fruit and discovering that they were naked, as in Genesis. There are also more overlays within the characters. And as part of this history of the human race, of the angels, continues to come into focus, we are able to see parallels within the 6 days of creation and what is held as the border sacrifice. The Hebrew El Shaddai and the Chinese Shangdai or Shangdi, both meaning God, and all the more proving our Genesis, our God, ultimately, is the fact that there were no images representing this monotheistic God, such as in the second commandment given unto Moses. And as we see mathematical parallels within the strategic setting of the 64 squares of chess, the 64 of the tactic of divination that is the I Ching, it can only highlight all the more its genius, as there is nothing outside of God. That number 64 is further paralleled within our genetic code, consisting of 64 codons, and a signature within our very cell, paralleling the 4-letter Hebrew name of God, consisting of 3 letters in 4 places, which is a total combination of 64. All this making all the more clear that we are the crown jewel of creation, the very royalty of God itself. Aggrandizing this all the more is the Copper Scroll, which is a part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, being a literal treasure map to the treasures of God's temple and made up of 64 sections. 64 sections, 64 entries to 64 locations. The Copper Scroll, the treasure map of the Yahad, known as the Essenes, the ancient Hebrews who made and saw to the preservation of the map, just as the rest of the Dead Sea Scrolls. For years, it has been wondered if this map was to a literal material treasure, or was directing us to something about or within ourselves. Different studies have suggested encoded intelligence, such as in the 7th column of the Copper Scroll. It is held that there were 7 cubits dug to stash away 22 talents of treasure. Now, 22 over 7 is the smallest whole number approximation of pi, the mathematical constant. And when you multiply all of the numerals used for the very next site, 3, 60, and 2, it comes out to 360, as in 360 degrees, a circle, as pi is the relationship between a circumference and its diameter. And though earlier we saw that mathematical constant of pi encoded within the first verse of Genesis, and done so in several ways, still for years it was claimed that pi was written in error in 1 Kings and in 2 Chronicles, mistakenly recorded as 3. However, when reading just a little further, an important detail is noted which reflects that it was completely accurate as to the mathematical constant of pi, as you see here. And as so much of this comes full circle and is all the more understood, we will not only continue to see further proof that we are indeed the crown jewels of creation, royalty of God itself. Further proof is by the extents made possible today by the grace of God itself. Readings reflect that the copper scroll is indeed a treasure map leading to the artifacts within God's temple, which were rescued and hidden away by the Israelites, which were guarding it at the time. These readings being reported by some of the heavenly host, just as the rest of those who have been featured in these sharings, the very angels of God's army that the Yahad, that the ancient Hebrews were awaiting in the desert of Qumran.
Out in the Dead Sea Scrolls, waiting for the army of holy angels, the heavenly host. And we don't understand that for them, the heavenly host are the warrior angels. That the heavenly host is a force like 100 atomic bombs.
Part of archaeology sometimes now is awaiting out the technology to be able to, now we can do archaeology from the sky, you know, we can do aerial scans. But this is different. This was bringing in a special metal detector that we could adjust to look for large objects, look deep, be able to adjust to the mineralization of the soil out in the Dead Sea area. And so that happened. It's a lot of also more drama, more intrigue, political figures get involved. And so the site was scanned in a very unorthodox way. And what we can say is that we scanned 6 of the 60 sites, and there was a positive read. Actually, one read that was so positive, I tell people it looked like Fort Knox. It was testing positive for something large and something non-ferrous, which means gold medal or gold, silver, or bronze. And we're stuck. And we're stuck, because what do you do with this information? It was a member of Knesset that did the scan. It wasn't a permitted scan. And so for 2 years now, we've sort of lived in this hold of, we didn't want to tell the archaeologist associated with this. We'd get them in trouble.
What's happening with the Sanhedrin? Because I know the Sanhedrin is like rabbis who are connected together, and especially also about the Temple Mount. There is also the Temple Institute. So is there something moving on with them about that?
Right. So for years, word started to leak out about the Copper Scroll and about how it was connected to temple treasures. And we all know, I mean, with what's happened recently 2 years ago with UNESCO kind of changing the language to sort of de-Judaize Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. So there became a little bit of a desperation to, we have evidence of the outside of the walls of the temple, of the courtyards of the temple. Archaeology has proven that, but we actually don't have anything from the interior of the first or the second temple. So what they want a banner to march under, and the Temple Mount movement has become tethered to the Copper Scroll Project in that way, is that archaeology can assist in that fight, and archaeology also can can sort of appease what we now see as happening as Temple Mount denial. And so that's why we have lots of friends and allies in the Temple Mount movement that have been willing to help and been willing to get involved.
As here we have evidence that indeed, as everything else, it was for a reason that God had those that were guarding its word in that time and space preserve these treasures and make such a map that would lead back to what will again fill the temple once more. As you are living in a time where this is the end of a paradigm for those who foolishly actually thought that they won some sort of war against the elect of God, as this is indeed the very coming of Christ. And though the 64 sections of the Copper Scroll serve all the more to show that we are indeed the treasures of God itself, our race, its angels, those 64 sections of the Copper Scroll paralleling not just the 64 hexagrams of the Yi Ying, but our very genetic code, made up of 64 codons, with one of the Hebrew names for God being 3 letters in 4 places, thus 64 possible combinations, and being made up of 4 characters at root is further signature of God itself throughout creation, as there are 4 dimensions of time and space, and that orchestration is displayed and represented through the first verse of Genesis being composed of 4 sevens, signature of the sovereignty of God itself throughout the heavens and the earth. And it brings all the more light to the overlay of our genetic code having a basis of 4 nucleotides. And amazingly, the Yi Ying used for divination mirroring the makeup of our very genetic code, that table being able to be divided into 4 sections. Yet of course, as we navigate through life in our God-given Merkava, our chariot, our human body, the body of the angel, further reinforcing that there is never anything outside of God, is that the scepter shall never depart from Yahuda, the 4th son of Yisrael. Again, further highlight that it is God itself that rules the 4 dimensions of time and space. And bringing all the more depth to walk before it and be perfect is the fact that making your decisions with the purest of intentions from the heart may not be something that is so stupid after all, as not only in the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation, it is held that the heart rules over the body, that the heart is like a king at war. This holding that the heart rules over the body is now backed scientifically by the fact that the heart is the largest electromagnetic field of the human body, as science holds even more so than our very brain. The heart and the supercomputer that is our very brain are synchronized as the electromagnetic fields of our bodies interact with the rest of these quantum fields, which are the heavens and the earth. Further substantiating these tables of divination, these ancient technologies overlaying the very interworkings of our very bodies, is the 72-letter names of God, which are written in 3-letter words, such as our very DNA. Even closer parallel to the works of our very bodies, the 216 numbers in triplet form which make up the 72 names of God, parallel what is held as Metatron's cube, our Merkaba having a pattern of 216 numbers, our Merkaba being held as a chariot throughout the 4 dimensions of time and space, in its purest depth, representing our very body. These parallels are showing that even these tables parallel the very functions, the very structures of our bodies. The Sefer Yetzirah, holding that God created the universe using 32 paths of wisdom, and not only are there 32 transfer RNAs serving as physical links within our body during the processes of our DNA, but also senses of the human body, the body of the angel. Here we see a depiction of a table famously held within the Sefer Yetzirah of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet placed in a circle with a total of 231 connections between them, as displayed here in form of mathematical formula. And just as it is held that God created the heavens and the earth, the universe, using 22 letters and 10 divine numbers. Further signature of God within our very cellular structure, encapsulating those features within the very cell, as further demonstrated here when it comes to the 10 divine numbers. Just as the Hebrew script is rooted in a base 10 decimal system, our biblical texts are also based off a base 10 decimal system. In our genetic code, our genetic texts are scientifically shown to be synchronized, to be structured by a decimal system. A signature of God within our very cell, further proof that you are the very crown jewel of creation. Amongst the intricate inner workings and mechanics of our genetic text is the highlight of what many know as angel numbers. Studying the amino acids of our genetic code has found that the standard blocks, side chains, which are a part of those amino acids, in sync with the decimal system, repeatedly showed balanced sums which took the unique form of angel numbers. This uniform structure made apparent by the divisibility of 37. As here we see a very specific and special characteristic of the number 37 within the scope of the decimal system. As here, upon review of this table of the multiplications of the number 37, you will notice a distinct pattern beginning at 37 times 3, our first pattern of angel numbers. Now, you'll notice that 37 times 3 is 111. 111. You'll also notice that adding the angel numbers together comes out to the number we just multiplied by 37. Now skip 2 digits over, of which we are multiplying by 37, and the pattern commences again, as 37 times 6 is 222. 2, 2, 2. And when we add together those 3 2's, it comes out to the number 6, which we multiplied by 37 to come out to 222. This pattern persists while the digits are in triplet form. Further detail as to the unique design embedded within 37 is in between those angel numbers. Those columns are permutations of the same numbers. For example, the column of 37 times 1, 37 times 10, and 37 times 19 are each permutations of 0, 3, and 7, as you see upon closer review. That characteristic takes place within the two columns in between the angel numbers, as you are seeing here. Now, as we're continuously gaining all the more definition as to God encoding the entire Torah into a crystalline substance, after the intricacy with regards to detail that we just saw when it came to the number 37 in its synchronization with our genetic code, we are able to understand all the more clearly why the word wisdom has an ordinal gematria of 37, as we just saw that very wisdom encoded into our genetic code, synchronized with the number 37. As we delve into the genesis of our genetic text, in the first verses of Genesis, the 37th word, the number 37, being synchronized with our genetic code, that 37th word is light, the very way that our cells communicate. And it begins with the 137th letter. 137 is renowned to represent the very mathematical constant which measures the relationship between electrically charged particles and light. And the recent discovery of the fourth phase of intracellular water structure being a crystalline hexagonal structure, as there are crystalline hexagonal structures throughout the universe. This parallel, this alignment, brings all the more realization to God encoding the entire Torah within a crystalline substance, and that the kingdom of heaven is within. The modern day consensus as to the beginnings of our universe overlays ancient holdings of and supporting Genesis, such as the central point, the singularity, which is pinpointed within the gematria of the first verse of Genesis, and furthermore aligning with Genesis even deeper still is that the modern day scientific consensus as to the origins of our universe hold that at the Big Bang was the beginning of time, which overlays the first verse of Genesis, in the beginning, the start of time. And as we continue to rediscover, we get more of an idea of just how advanced those since the beginning of our human history have been. Connections between the astronomical chapters of the Book of Enoch and a famous, quote, Babylonian star map, star catalog have been observed for quite a while. However, unlike some previous opinions, by now it should be clear that the origins of such information is indeed rooted from what was preserved and passed on by Enoch. And as historical records reflect, it was Abraham that taught astronomy as well as other disciplines to the Babylonians and also the Egyptians. The original calendar of the human being, the original calendar of ours, the angels, is further proof of the very gifts of God, such as our very breath. It is true that the cosmic order of the very stars by their organization is in sync exactly with the calendar, and proof of exactly that is the Castle Pyramid, a calendar represented in stone, both with its architectural layout of having a body of water underneath, such as renowned to be the case with the pyramids around the world, and also representing the calendar of the angels with its features. It proves all the more Genesis chapter 11 verse 1 that all the world was of one language. And reinforcement of that is that it is held that the 7 lighted triangles and the 6 dark triangles, which takes place at both the spring and the autumn, the fall equinox, represent the 7 days of creation, of course, exactly just as the account of Genesis. This masterful genius, displayed, channeled through architecture by the grace of God, shows that this calendar has been and is indeed perfect, let alone without calendar drift, as precisely 182 days pass between the 2 equinoxes, 182 days, of course, being half of the 364-day year. And if need be, perhaps in the near future, we can do a recount to make sure to reaffirm this fact, that the arrangement of the very stars follows the order within the calendar passed down since Adam and Eve. Thus, the phenomena at the Castle Pyramid. And just as there are 4 dimensions of time and space, and also the number 7, as in Genesis, stands for a cycle in time, we see that the 364-day calendar is divisible by both 4 and 7.
The group that wrote the scrolls dated their festivals every year according to a 364-day calendar. This group had a 364-day calendar which is exactly divisible by 7, so that the same date fell on the same day of the week every year. It never changed. And this had some advantages, such as festivals never falling on the Sabbath.
And now here we'll see the very features of the calendar Castle Pyramid, which represent the 364-day calendar which was passed down to Enoch since Adam and Eve, preserved through the flood since Noah and Zara to their children, preserved and protected through time down to the warrior angels in Qumran. Now to the features of that very calendar etched into an edifice, into this work of art, which proves Genesis 11 verse 1, that all the world was of one language. Previous sharings, here we see that the calendar which was passed down to Enoch was represented in one of these pyramids, just as the most ancient and what is proven to be the most advanced of knowledge has been embedded throughout the others. The phenomena that takes place at the equinox is held to represent the 7 days of creation. And now here we'll see the parallels, or closer put, the reflection, and how this calendar is represented in this castle, this pyramid.
In the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have numerous documents who are talking about solar calendar, of pre-calculated calendar emerging, commencing in the spring. While the Jewish calendar, known to all of you who are following the Jewish calendar, is starting in the autumn. The current Jewish calendar is starting in the autumn, in the month of Tishrei, while the biblical calendar states explicitly that the calendar starts in the spring. In the book of Exodus 12, we are told that the calendar is commencing in the month of the spring, the first month of the year, where the year is starting as a divine declaration of the beginning of freedom, of the epoch of freedom. It is given up in the time where the story of the departure from Egypt, the exodus from Egypt, Then there is a calendar introduced, and it is said, this month, the month of the spring, is the head of the year or the first of the month. You would always start to count from the first month. Is the presence of a solar calendar, a calendar which the writers ascribe to a mythical ancient past. The people who had authored the book of First Enoch, it's called the Ethiopian Enoch because it was first known to us in the language of Giz, which is an Ethiopian language, Semitic Ethiopian language. In the book of Enoch, chapter 72-82 is telling us in great detail on the calendar of 364 days. In the book of Psalms that had been found in Qumran, entirely different genre, you know, Psalms. In the extra Psalms, those which are not known to us in the Bible, in the Psalm scrolls which is presented in the shrine of the book, in column 27 we are told that David, king of Israel, the one who had been described as wise and as poetically gifted and as a prophet according to this scroll, had authored 364 daily songs for each day of the year. He further had authored 52 sacred songs for every one of the Sabbaths of the years. He further authored 18 special songs for the holidays of the year. Now, in entirely different kind of genre, let's say the book of Jubilees, which is para-biblical because it is retelling the book of Genesis. In the book of Jubilees, we are told that Noah had stayed in the ark 364 days, which are divided equally to 4 seasons of 91 days, commencing in the spring. The same is true for the scroll of priestly watches, which is worked on a calendar of 364 days. The same is true to a letter called Miktzat Maaseh Torah, a few observations on the acts of the Torah. The scroll is commencing with a calendar telling us that the first week of the year starts in the spring, and there are 52 weeks in every year, and in each week a different priestly scroll is serving according to a calendar of 364 days. Now, the centrality of the solar calendar could not be exaggerated in the library of Qumran. As I said, in various different genres, in various different literary modes, the centrality of the calendar is put forward. It was a priestly calendar, divided according to the priestly sevenfold divisions. Because if there was anything sacred to the priestly calendar, it was the following assertion: the covenant between God and his people is based on the following fact: every 7 day one should not work on a Sabbath. Every 7 holidays of the first 7 months of the year, one must refrain from work according to the biblical law.
And further testament to the goodness, to the greatness of our literally Almighty God is the fact that the 4th commandment is to remember to observe the Sabbath. Notice a connection again between 4, as in the 4 dimensions of time and space, and the number 7, since Genesis standing for a cycle in time and is the 7th day of the week, the Sabbath. And to put this as closely as possible, just as any loving parent would do for you, in time you find out that what was commanded of you was ultimately for your own good. And beautifully, science shows that aspects of our biology, our very bodies, operates on a 7-day cycle. And to say the least, once more, this calendar, this 7-day cycle has been passed down since Adam and Eve, ultimately passed on to Moses, who passed it on once again to the Israelites, the Hebrews in the desert. And as we see 7 representing a cycle in time in all the ways that it does, such as Jericho being circled 7 times on a 7th day, which is a conversation in itself. And as we are blessed with living in a time where we are able to see such revelations, it makes all the more clear Revelation 5:5 and the breaking of the 7 seals, as it is a complete honor, of course, to share this reality, and only bringing all the more clarity to this alignment in time and space. Scientific studies have shown that the universe itself has slowed down and sped up 7 times. And seeing how there are aspects of our body, of our biology, which operate on a 7-day cycle, just as the commandment to remember the Sabbath, and seeing how the universe has slowed down and sped up 7 times, only all the more accredits the oneness gifted by the grace of God. That slowing down and speeding up brings reflections of the scripture, which holds in essence, what is the sign of your Creator in you? It is movement and rest, movement and repose. And just as it has been held that mankind was created at a stage, at a height where it had such ingenious, God-given information infused within it, of course, how long could it have possibly taken anyone to develop a written script that infuses both the written word and mathematical expressions? How long would it have taken a human being to align physical edifices with the stars themselves, the same types of buildings which they cannot recreate today? And as we continue to relearn and understand all the more this information, it brings all the more clarity to the holding that God made Adam and Eve at an age of 20, and that upon the resurrection, mankind would return to an age of 20. That resurrection being the revival of our true history as we are coming upon it now, that age of 20 representing a height of consciousness as it is represented on top of the calendar, castle, pyramid. And as it will only become all the more clear that it is God itself that reigns over the four dimensions of time and space. These heights that we are now reaching by the grace of God brings to mind four words which were the dawn of the precursor to the text message, to electronic mail, Morse code, which read, "What hath God wrought?" A highlight of the height of technology at the time. And God, being the creator of what is both original and also the most innovative, I, being the very line of Christ, the Mashiach, has come with the introduction of gifts which represent a full circle, an Eden to Eden, which represent the evolution of the human being and ultimately the full circle of the angel.
What we can say about the Mashiach is the Mashiach, in a certain way, to use a term from biology, from evolution theory, the Mashiach is definitely, in a certain way, a new positive mutation of mankind. It is like a quantum leap of humanity to a new place. Almost to say that a new species of mankind is appearing on the scene of reality.
As here we will see how this gift from God is indeed holy, which means to be set apart, special, as again it is the glory of God to entrench or to hide a thing. It is the honor of queens and kings to seek them out. And we are now at a place in time where we see that every bit of our world has been fine-tuned to reveal and to harness this very gift. The alignment of the discovery that in fact our DNA is a fractal antenna able to pick up electromagnetic fields, including the ranges of radio frequency, overlaying with the holding that when Mashiach, which means Messiah or Christ, comes, that the radio channels will be a different scene, a different vibration. And again here, we are now in a time that we know our very DNA channels radio frequency.
Of the world. And the first thing that happens when Mashiach comes is that all of the radio channels, it's all a different scene, a different vibration.
A part of the holistic process of picking up those radio frequencies is the newly discovered, the fourth phase of intracellular water structure, which is used for energy and also to store and transmit information. That fourth stage of intracellular water structure being a crystalline substance perfectly overlaying with God encoding the entire Torah in a crystalline substance.
New interpretations of the text now suggest the entire Torah was encoded into a crystalline substance, not necessarily a crystal, but a crystalline substance that fit into the palm of a single hand. And when the Ark of the Covenant is revealed and made public, we will see that is the case.
Along with the fourth stage of intracellular water structure, and our DNA being a fractal antenna, the physioelectric processes within our body due to the microcrystals within our brain allow for the picking up of radio frequencies, which is showing to be the precursors, potentially, to telepathy, as you see an example of here.
We do know that Earth's magnetic fields affect everything from our mood to our ability to learn. Even stranger, research has begun to prove links between the electromagnetic field of our planet and psychic abilities. Could these crystals act like tiny antennas, connecting our brains to each other and to the entire planet? This is Dr. Michael Persinger, a neuroscientist who has argued that all phenomena, including consciousness, spiritual experiences, and even paranormal events, can be explained by physical mechanisms, and they can be verified using the scientific method. Since 1971, he has been researching electromagnetic field effects upon biological organisms. And some of his recent studies sound straight out of a sci-fi movie. Dr. Persinger has shown in the laboratory that magnetic brain stimulation can create mental states conducive to human telepathy. A recent experiment placed two people at a distance in different rooms. Each was surrounded by an identical computer-controlled magnetic field. When a light was flashed in one subject's eye, the person in the other room showed responses in their brain as if they saw the flash of light. As Dr. Persinger stated, we think that's tremendous because it may be the first macro demonstration of a quantum connection, or so-called quantum entanglement. If true, then there's another way of potential communication.
Now, being blessed with this gift from God, the agencies that have been looking for this activity, or more so hoping it wouldn't come along so they wouldn't get caught, of course, are needing a transcranial magnetic stimulation device, which they use to not only peer into your thoughts, to peer into your dreams, but also look out through your very eyes and stare at your very loved ones naked throughout whatever moments of intimacy or whatever moments within your mind that you thought you kept to yourself. This is a fact, and this is going on now. Now, as I said, they need a transcranial magnetic stimulation device in order to do this. I am doing this by our original God-given tech with no such controlled environment, no such appliances or equipment on my body whatsoever. More on this and specifically can be found within the sharings displayed here. And of course, anyone looking to challenge any of this against the actual line of Christ, the actual Mashiach, feel free to contact me.